Welcome to this video where we're going to add exception handling in our controller to handle when the product by the ID is not found. So in the previous videos, when we were having an optional like this, we usually just said, okay, we want to get the optional, but that's not usually the best practice. You would want to handle the exception scenario where a product with that ID doesn't exist. And one of the ways that we can do that is we can throw an exception if that item is not present, like within the optional. So what can we do before returning the optional? Right here in the get product by ID, we can first check if that kind of option, if the optional is present. And we can do that by doing an if check, and we can say product optional dot is empty, and that checks whether the optional is empty or present. So there's a check is empty, that's checking if the optional is empty, and there's a check is present if the optional is there. So if the optional is present, we want to throw an exception, and in this case I'm gonna throw a new response status exception, and it's gonna take an HTTP status, and let's just send not found. So we're just throwing an exception of not found because we didn't find a product with that product ID that was provided. So that's kind of like a more appropriate scenario in this case, where we're doing an exception handling in the case that a product was not found with the product ID. So now when I restart the application, and if I go to the get product by ID call right here, so let me just get to that call. That's going to be this, but I'm just going to specify an ID that we don't have now because I just started the application. We're really not going to have any ID. So no matter what I put here, it's probably going to return the 404. So let me just try it. And as you can see, now we're getting a 404 not found. Previously, we would have gotten a 500 exception, unknown server error exception. But now we're specifically getting a 404 error indicating that probably a product with ID 1 does not exist. So we can do the same for the other methods where we are doing search by ID. So I could take this conditional and I can use it here on the update product. So before getting the optional, I can do that check. And right here, also I can do the same thing right over here. But here we can do the check a little differently. I could, for example, check if the product list dot contains product, but the product list wouldn't take a predicate. So what can we do is we can actually we can do a stream, and we can do like a filter or any match, but let's just do any match where product would, and if we get the ID of the product equals the product ID. So if any matches, but in this case we don't want any of them to match, and it is, as you can see, it will suggest for us to replace it with non-match. So I'm just gonna say that. So if none match, so if we have the list and if none of them matches the product ID, that means that we don't have any product with that ID, then in that case we also want to throw the HTTP status not found. Now I was going to solve it using the same thing, but in this case I solved it with the non-match thing. So the non-match is one of the things that we can use to make sure that something does not exist in a list. So if none of the items in the list match, we're gonna get obviously true here that none of them matched, and we're gonna throw the exception. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna restart the application. We're gonna go into Postman, and let me just, okay, it's probably started up. So now if I go and try to delete a product by ID, and because we don't have anything, it's gonna see that nothing like that exists, and it's gonna say, okay, not found. Yeah, not found. Because we're sending the ID 3, we're checking if we have a product with ID 3. using this clause here. There's no such thing, and we're throwing an exception. Now let me just add some products. Let me just add a product with ID 3. Then I should be able to delete it completely fine. And as you can see, we deleted it successfully. So that's working pretty fine. And also for the update product, let me try the update product. So I'm going to try to update the product with ID 3. I ran it, 404 not found because we don't have a product with ID 3. But if I go ahead and add a product with ID 3, I should be able to update the product. And as you can see, we were able to update it. I can get that product then. I should be able to get the product, and I should be able to delete the product. And if I get that product again, we should not have it anymore, and we would get the 404 not found. So that's how would we do exception handling, for example, in this case for a 404 not found when we can't find a product by its ID. And that's going to be it for this video.